Today, Dr. Emma Woodward, a child psychologist with over 25 years experience from the child psychology services, someone that I've met through family, and we spoke at a charity event the end of last year. Also a successful TEDx speaker, talking about, raising kids in our anxious world, from being a good parent and understanding how our kids have grown up, what they're going through, and how as a parent we're handling it. And I'm very excited to have Emma on the show here. Exceptionally knowledgeable. I feel already that I'm going to be sitting back quite a bit because there's so much knowledge to come out of you, Emma, and for our audience to learn from it. But thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. And I better live up to that introduction now. That was very kind of you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. We spoke about off air. You just recently did a TEDx speak. Was it middle to end part of last year?
Yeah.
That came out exceptionally successful on that. And to anyone out there, you can go and find, search Emma Woodward on YouTube, and you'll find the speak that you did there for TEDx. And he's talking about the whole the parenting with kids in environments we live in today. Also about how kids are anxious and the depression and self-harm that we see in sort of the society today in our youth. But it's not just from, one moment a month ago or something like that. It's just sort of time period that has caused our kids and our society get into the space. I'd love to know sort of more on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's something I think as a parent and a psychologist is really important to me. And as I've become a parent, I've become more aware that I am parenting my children in a messed up world. Like, what do I do to be able to enable them to thrive, to continue to have hope, to be able to reimagine the way that we live? Because over the last few generations, I think we've moved away from a focus on human flourishing and towards a focus on economic flourishing. I don't see them that they need to be particularly mutually exclusive, but the balance is off, and we are seeing that in our mental health is a general trend across all human beings, actually. So I think, it's a really important topic to kind of really consider, because when you become a parent, obviously you want to do the best for your child, but often the tools that you have to do the best come from the way that you were parented. And the world that we're parenting our children in now is absolutely it couldn't be more different to the world that we were raised in. So I was born in the mid-70s, and I didn't get a mobile phone till I was 18. If you wanted to meet your friends, you kind of popped out after school, you jumped on your bike and you cycled down to the newsagent, and if they weren't there, you either had to ride around looking for them or you had to go home. There's lots of resilience opportunities in that. And there weren't so many wide influences being kind of piped down our devices that would influence the way that I thought or the way that I should be. My influences were very small. It was more at a community level rather than a global level. And so our kids today have got so many more different influences, and trying to keep that bubble around them in which they can develop into happy, healthy human beings is actually outside of our control as parents now. And so what we really need to be thinking is, how do we shift our parenting to be able to create or mitigate some of the risks there are in the world that also enables our children to make good choices when the world isn't that safe. So I've been kind of thinking about that a lot because, like I said, I've got 4 kids. And it's trying to get that balance right. It's trying to remember what we actually need as human beings to feel good and function well, and not be kind of caught up in what, I guess, algorithms and people who want to sell us things. So algorithms, consumerism kind of want us to be in order to make money off us. Humanity's been commoditized. And I think we need to get back to basics and remember that human beings are everything. And we need to be able to think about what human beings actually need to feel good and function well, rather than what the economy needs. And we've lost our way a little bit. And that's why we're seeing some of the issues we're seeing in terms of our mental health statistics.
It is so true. There's a couple of interesting parts. So if we go back to our previous, my youth, your youth, and there's just as a quirky, interesting note, the term "where are you" only ever came about with the introduction of smartphones. Because when we grew up and you phoned someone, you knew exactly where they were because that was a physical phone plugged into a wall. So you never phoned them and said, "Hey, Emma, where are you?" I knew because I phoned your home phone. Yeah. So there was this whole thing of knowing exactly where a person was, or the situational to be at a specific venue. And then also, like you said, is you grew up in a small community, whether it was a large city, but the community filtered you by the world news and all the let's say the violence and the struggles and the economy was filtered out naturally from the wider sense. So by the time it came into your family or your circle, you never knew about it. I never knew about, when I grew up as a kid, and I can imagine with yourself, is world problems never came down to me. Situational things, the economy never got down to me as a child. I was never aware of that. I grew up, in South Africa during apartheid with Nelson Mandela coming down, and even with that massive amount of change, through 94, Mandela coming out elected, all of it had to be communicated through my circle. It wasn't like I went and actually watched the news or took the paper, and it was just filtered and filtered and filtered. So you felt it a little bit, but it wasn't as pressured or pushed onto as it is today with devices and cell phones and laptops and the social media world we live in at the moment.
Yeah, there's so many different media outlets, and and because of the high level of competition, they have to get more sensationalist to get more attention, because attention can be commoditized and people will buy things. And so everything is really overstimulating. That phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. So everything gets more and more kind of sensationalized. And if you're kind of being exposed to that at a very young age, when your brain is still wiring and kind of learning about the world, is it a safe place? Who am I? What do people in my culture act like? What do people in my country act like? There's lots of different things that are going on in a child's brain, and there's so many different messages at the moment, which I think are creating a sense of confusion and frustration and a sense of kind of a high level of anxiety. There is no real safe place anymore. And so as a parent, I think I've had to think really carefully, not only as a parent, but also as a psychologist, what is it that children really need to develop into happy, healthy human beings? And that is a secure attachment with an attuned, responsive caregiver. And like I said earlier, often the skills that we learn on how to parent lay dormant in us until we become parents. I don't know about you, but there's often times when I've been like, oh my God, my mother just flew out of my mouth, and that is
my dad. My dad.
I never knew that default pattern was laid down in my brain until that very moment when it flew out. And so as parents, I think we're having to do this double work. We're having to kind of become very self-aware of the default conditioning that we've got from our own childhood, as well as rapidly learn how we need to parent children in society today. So it's really hard. I call us the transitional generation. You mentioned the smartphone. It kind of came out in 2007, and our world has significantly changed since then. And I'm not anti-tech, absolutely not anti-tech. I've got 4 kids, and if we didn't have iPads, I would sometimes scream into the wind louder than I do. It's really important, I think, sometimes to have that space. But it's about how we use technology well, and how we make sure that the influences our children are exposed to have a positive impact on them, or that they have the emotional regulation abilities to check in with themselves and know how something's affecting them, so they can make the choice to not do it or do more of something that makes them feel well. And it's going back to those basics. And for me, it all comes back down to self-awareness and emotional regulation.
It's so true. I love how you say the transitional state or transitional time period as parents now, because there's always that weird notion that we always have the previous generation on a pedestal. There's a lot of people that go, hey, when I grew up, we had it this way and you guys have it easier today. And then when I speak to a grandparent or, the next generation back, they always put their path on a pedestal. It was better then because we didn't have that sort of stuff. Whether that is right or wrong, we are obviously transition into a total different generational, that's what we say, the transitional shift between the previous generation and the current one. And I'm guessing, the biggest things, as you said now, is learning as a parent and how to manage that, because even myself as a young parent, I only got very little bit of what my kids are growing up at the moment, right? My coolest thing as a kid was I had a beeper. Right, I went to high school with a beeper on my belt, and I thought I was the coolest kid in school. Not that I ever got one during the week, but I think my mom would send 1 or 2 during the week just that I got something. But I thought I was the coolest kid in the world, right? And you look back and go, man, that you would have just looked awkward. But that was, so I didn't even grow up with any of that younger smart stuff. And now, as you said, going into parenthood, it's understanding where it is, because you can't take the technology away from your child, because it's hard to bring up a child in today's society without them understanding or appreciating what the technology is. But then it's like, okay, how far do you allow that part to go? So I fully agree of, hey, if I didn't have iPads when I travel with my kids or on a flight or and stuff like that, yeah, there would be more problems in the world. But it's also bringing in the parenting skills to go, hey, that is a component of it. It's not all of it. Like my daughter for this week, she got herself a head down in a book. Actually on a physical book, and I could not budge her. I could not get her off of bed. I could not do anything. Every day, every moment I picked up from school to take her to any extra curriculum, it was head down in the book for like 4 or 5 days till she finished it. And that was sort of, to me, it's like cool moments as a parent going, there's still that attraction, there's still that, and it shows that can still make a difference to a child compared to her sitting on a cell phone and TikTok or YouTube or Instagram and just consuming time like I do as a parent.
And I think, and I think that's a really nice point, is that, kids do get drawn into things, and it doesn't have to be a device. It can be a book. It can be an activity. It's lovely to be able to let them go off and have their imagination fire in whatever kind of creates that space for them. And it's about allowing those moments to happen for them. And I'm not tech bashing, and I'm not tech bashing parents who use technology. We are more stressed and stretched and overwhelmed than ever before as parents. The last generation and the generation before, typically only one parent needed to work to bring in an appropriate amount of income to support the family. Now you're talking about two parents working full time and still struggling to pay bills. And so, parenting becomes this luxury rather than the centre of what needs to be done, because this focus is on creating enough money to be able to put food on the table, to pay the mortgage or the rent or the bills, And so what happens when you're stretched and stressed and tired is that you don't have the emotional capacity left over to be able to be creative and thoughtful about how you parent. And giving your kid this is, an easy option. And I'm not bagging that. I completely understand and compassionate as to how that can happen, and it's not good enough.
Yeah, it is. We all have had our moments. I'm sure even yourself, Emma, has had those moments, and I've had them, right? But so to any parents at the moment that is listening or watching at the moment, and let's take it a bit back to sort of stuff. Is what is the big things we need to pay attention? Let's get into the nuts and bolts about pay attention with our kids, with the young youth growing up at the moment, that we should pay attention as a parent, and how can we react as a parent to try and shift, drive, or change it, seeing if there's something coming up from the child either being overstimulated by having one device and not looking at options, as well as maybe from the information that's in there going down that path of them not having self-confidence, being a confident kid, being an engaged kid. So there's sort of like a couple of pieces in there.
Yeah, no, and kids need a wide variety of opportunities and experiences to develop into happy, healthy human beings. You can't outsource all of that to technology, and we need to be active participants in parenting our children if we want them to be, mentally well, if we want them to be healthy, if we want them to have good emotional regulation. We need to do all those things for and with them. So it's really important that we try and get that balance right. But I also understand that in the world that we live in today, it's quite difficult. And that's why I think we need a paradigm shift on how we live on this planet, because it is no longer fit. It is no longer fit for human flourishing. We're all stretched and stressed and activated, and that naturally translates down onto our children. And if you think about one of the statistics that came out from the World Economic Forum recently was that youth disillusionment is now one of our greatest immediate risks. That's kind of quite a shocking and sobering thought, isn't it? That our kids go on.
So, can you explain what that means?
Yeah.
Just because that's quite a big word.
It is.
Can you just mean what the youth disillusionment means from that report?
Yeah, so youth disillusionment means that kids have lost hope. They're not seeing the fabric of society as undone. Yeah. And they've become kind of nihilistic and hopeless. And so therefore, why would you work together as a community? Why would you work together as a society? Our mental health is now to the point that we see the symptoms of that at breaking point in lots of our youth, and that's really important. The World Economic Forum are looking at that because it's really important, because actually it's often the younger generation that supports economically the older generation. So we've got a generation coming through now that are disillusioned, that are unwell, cannot work together enough to not only support themselves but support the previous generation and the next generation. Then that's a big risk, not just from an economic standpoint but also from a societal standpoint too. And so when somebody is disillusioned or when they lose hope, you will see associated mental health difficulties with that, such as depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm, because people don't know how to be okay. They don't know what to do when they don't know what to do, and everything feels overwhelming. They kind of give up. What's the point? And that if that is the mindset of children growing up today, then we need to really address that now before it gets any worse.
Yeah, it is so true. I mean, in New Zealand, we obviously have a major, I know it's a worldwide issue about self-harm and suicide, but we obviously know in New Zealand, specifically within our youth, it is an issue that it seems a crazy one to have, and it's a horrible one to have. I always struggle to talk about it and read the reports, and I've spoken on other shows before about, I know there's a lot of this stuff is what the leaders into it. But it's like no one can point out why specifically New Zealand is that our challenge. Our big one of like, how can we resolve that? And there's no magic in the bottle to resolve that. It's the same we see in America with the gun violence, right? The youth, that's their thing,
symptom.
That's their symptom that they can't trigger. I was reading the news this week, and I might have my days wrong, but it's like we are 48 days into the new year, and they've had something like 63 gun violence incidents registered. So just as anyone knows, again, I might be off by one, but I think a gun violence incident that they record is over four deaths or 4 people shot. So that's before more to be recognized as a mass shooting. So they've had over more mass shootings than days there have been in this year in their instance. And I can imagine in New Zealand, as well as time of recording the show, in New Zealand, we've had our 2 biggest weather events we've had in generations. We've had a 100-year storm in Auckland. We just got hit by Cyclone Gabriel that has literally destroyed the country. So you can imagine as well the emotional states. My kids, personally, in our household, in our community, everyone's feeling it. So there's just going to be so much more. And the challenge we might have, Emma, is in New Zealand, a lot of it's kept quiet. So we're not going to realize that the impact at this moment or this trigger, so let's just call it a situational trigger, has impacted to our children. We're not going to know how that is for 3, 6, or 9 months just to see how our kids are, but also we don't know how the community is reacting, because unfortunately we don't want to make this big press noise that there's a struggle and we need to pay attention there. So it gets quiet till the annual report comes out and goes, oh, this is the state, and then it's too late.
Yeah, no, I was thinking a couple of things actually when you were saying that, because firstly, obviously I'm British, and lots of my friends live in the UK. And, like you say, we've had flooding, a cyclone and an earthquake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And an earthquake.
In the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And my friends in the UK haven't heard a bar of it. Like the media over there is focused quite rightly on the earthquake in Turkey and, lots of different things. But it is very localised. But actually, that is quite a specific local trauma. And then my husband relayed a comment that he overheard somebody talking about yesterday. They were like, oh, we'll be fine. Kiwis just push through. And when I heard that, my heart just stopped and my stomach just went, because that is the problem. We shouldn't just keep push throughing. Absolutely, that kind of number 8 wire kind of shut up and cope mentality, in the very, very first moments after a disaster, kind of the adrenaline rush, get you through something. But if we don't take time to stop and reflect on and process the actual feelings that created in us, then they stay in our bodies and they change the way that we show up going forwards. And so we're not very good at doing that in New Zealand. We're not very good at talking about our feelings.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's keep it within New Zealand, because obviously this point around it, it's so true. We don't support the openly speaking, from the mental health, from parents or even from the kids' point of view. Because then we've also got on the other side of it, we've got this whole tall poppy syndrome, right? To anyone else at the moment that's watching or listening from somewhere overseas, I think it is a New Zealand Australian tagged term, right? You might have never heard of it. Tall poppy syndrome is pretty much where you're pushing on or pressurizing, or anyone that has shown signs of success or growth, you literally turn around and go, you talk them down. So we've got this whole thing of people don't actually want to either say things because things are going well because of the risk of tall poppy, but also I feel that coin has both sides. Like, I also don't want to say that I'm not good because I'll have I don't want to say it a tall poppy, but almost another term that is the same thing of going, oh, you weak, you know, and therefore, you know, you're not great because you're weak and you're showing weakness and stuff. And myself personally, it's something I've had to grow more about through my own upbringing. I grew up in South Africa. My dad's an ex-military man. It was very straight. It was very hard. And you know, in that country, you're grown. You had to focus to survive. In South Africa, it's a beautiful country. I still think it challenges New Zealand as one of the most beautiful countries. Don't shoot me about that. But the focus and to try to make sure you get through it means you had to be hard. You could never show the weakness. Coming over to New Zealand, you can relax more. Me going through my personal situation of, you know, my brain tumor and coming through that in the community, and then realizing I've got to support and be more open as myself with my kids. My kids, I've got to allow them to have that because our youth growing up, as well as if I want to be able to talk to people like yourself or speak to people in the community about being open and mental health side and that, I can't still be standing there being staunch and going, oh no, I'm okay. And every day going, I'm okay. You know, that's unrealistic of what we're trying to do in our community.
It really is. And, you know, I'm just thinking about some of the local community responses. I'm quite connected to Piha, which is on the West Coast, obviously. I used to live there, so a lot of my friends are still there, and they've been quite battered by the cyclone, properly battered by the cyclone. And so I'm getting feedback from my friends about the community response that's happened there. And, you know, there's this real kind of coming together to get stuff done. You know, there's this organisation, there's, you know, aid going out, they've contacted people, there's food parcels going out, there's a real sharing and community organisation. What my hope is that when the initial kind of triggering phase kind of passes, there is also a space for people to continue talking about the impact on it, rather than people wanting to squash that down and repress that. Because I feel like, you know, there are some very beautiful, beautiful things about living in New Zealand, but being able to feel vulnerable and connected and open, I think, does lack.
Yep.
And I think that creates a sense, like you're saying, and you get caught this kind of fragile position of, you know, you have to push through, but you can't push through too well. And it kind of creates this narrow bandwidth in which you have to exist in. And not everybody functions well in that bandwidth.
Yeah, it's so true. I was just, as you mentioned about the event at the moment, I was going to say to you, what is your thoughts on what the next 3 to 6 months of the emotional state of the country is going to be, New Zealand specifically, and the impact to our youth? Because, you know, we obviously had Christchurch earthquake that decimated the country from its emotional state, from Christchurch, from the people that lost their lives, you know, and everything, from that point of view. But I feel this situation is different, in the reason being, not taking, I don't want to say it's worse or anything, please don't take it. It's totally different. Because what happens to a lot of people, it happened in their home. Yeah. And I think that's a different emotional state. So I've watched a lot of videos this week. Really struggled to watch through some of the videos this week when they interview homeowners, you know, talking about, I was watching a video of a gentleman last night where he was like, oh no, the water was outside of my lawns. I went back to sleep, and then an hour later, my cat woke me up, and the water was in my bedroom up to the bed level. And then literally an hour later, the house was gone. And it was almost like this invasion of privacy of our personal safe space that we've worked so hard to, that has been decimated for so much of the community, that I think that's where they're going to struggle most with. And that's where you look at a lot of the people that I've spoken to this week. It's like, okay, yes, we've lost a house, but it's that whole, I don't feel safe. And I'm really intrigued to see what your thoughts of what the next 3, 6, what this year could look like for these people, and then what the impact could be for our kids. And even, I know it's really fresh on our minds, but is there any thought pattern of how, as a psychologist, down to parents that might be watching, or just to any adults that's watching, what are some rules or tools we could try to utilize through this year to try to build up sort of that safe space again, which then passes down to the community?
Yeah, so I think, we're very good at the practical. We're not so good at the emotional, and the emotional is the thing that comes next and lasts longer. And so that's what we really need to be focusing on. I know for me, I was just listening to you on Monday night, we were terrified in our home. We live surrounded by big trees. The power went out. We had a tree come down, it just missed our house. You know, there was lots of stuff going on. We were like, where do we put the kids so they sleep safely if the tree comes down? Do we put mattresses in the garage? There were lots of kind of heightened emotions. And so Tuesday, I processed that by writing a little book for children on how to manage their feelings, which I published widely on social media. And the last action in that is helping others. And, you know, it's actually been a really good focus for me to be able to help process my feelings about how can I help others to be able to manage their feelings whilst managing my own feelings around that. And I think that's what we really need to be focusing on is the aftermath will be really being able to connect with the trauma that we've experienced so we can connect with the trauma that our children have experienced. Because if we can't connect with that within ourselves, then there is no way that we can connect for that with our children. And so if we repress that for ourselves and disconnect for that, we leave our children alone with their trauma. So we need to be thinking about how we can be introspective, be self-aware, manage our own emotional regulation so we can be there and present for our own children so they can help process their feelings too. And being mindful for signs as well, you know, lots of play reenactment in younger children, feeling like they don't want to re-engage with things or not having any emotional response at all and checking in with them about what they're feeling and what they know, but not being intrusive in that. But it is about being mindful about how we feel so we can connect with how our kids feel. Because if we can't do that, we can't do it for our kids. And I do think over the last few generations, we have been raised in a way that has increasingly disconnected us from our emotional life. And that has created a space that we can't be available enough to our children to help them develop a healthy emotional life, which means that when they grow up, they can't do it for their kids too. And it's become ad infinitum.
Proportionally smaller, right? Like, you know, so you're saying we're not available. I think about it that we're 90% consumed, so there's only 10% available. Yeah. And then as an adult, that 10% available is either you share it or utilize it or you give it back to yourself. So for parents that are, like you said before, we're in a generation that both parents are having to work. We're also in a generation, in an economical time that some parents are doing more than one job or doing 60, 70 hours a week. So that 10% comes down smaller from a percent point to share or give to their children. And then that goes, okay, I only gave to my kids 5%, so they're going to be used to that component, and when they go on, it's going down to like 2%. So we're going to get to a generation down the path that there's almost going to be no parent to kid emotional state, right? If we
you know, that is a potential if we carried on in that space. And the thing is those needs in children are not going to go away. They'll just meet them in different ways.
Yep.
And if they don't get met, then what we see are mental health issues. So, you know, if you think about the ram raids, for example, in Auckland at the moment, kids are going out robbing ice creams. Yep. They're not motivated by crime. They're motivated by notoriety and validation.
Which is fed by this whole need again the negative side of the technology, right? That some of it does. I talked about there was the police release that there was like private groups that they hacked, where they're literally in the groups was saying to like 13, 14, 15-year-old boys, go, cool, who can do the craziest thing to be like
to meet that need for validation, to get that sense of status met. And I'm not saying that their parents aren't doing that for them. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying there are things that happen in society that create these situations where things go wrong, you know, and not just focusing on that. You know, there's lots of the amount of time there, if we can't be, so as you go through your childhood in your early years, you are very parent oriented. You know, we are born into the world and we look to our primary caregiver to give us clues on how we need to be a human in the world that we've been born into. And as we go through and that's an opportunity for parents to really build that secure, attuned, responsive kind of relationship with their child, which is a bit sucky because as anybody with small children in today's society knows, it's really hard. You've got jobs, you've got daycare, you've got all sorts of things juggling, you know, but what our kids really need is that. Society doesn't allow us to do the role that parents really need to do. So it's not a parent issue, it's a society issue. And then as kids move through a developmental phase, they kind of hit 9, 10 through to kind of that tween year, those times. And then they start looking more outward for their influences in the world. You know, who should I be? Like they become more peer oriented. And anyone who parents teenagers will know that their peers are of paramount importance. What their friends are doing is so much more important than what their parents tell them to do. And so what happens when they get to that peer-oriented stage, if they haven't got what they need in those early years, they start trying to meet those needs with their peers. And if their peers haven't had what they need in those earlier years, you've got you've got tweens and teenagers parent each other with no real skills. And that's why things go wrong. It's you kind of sending them out into the world where it's basically this great unknown without any deep skills to know what to do when they don't know what to do. So they're kind of putting them out into a world that they're already unprepared for emotionally, but secondly is not fit or doesn't have the right influences to be able to support them anyway. So that's why we're seeing a great level of mental health issues in children and young people today, because they just don't have the things they need to be able to feel okay, not just in themselves, but in society. Yeah,
it is so true. And again, like I said, the ram raids the situation we are in New Zealand again specifically. We've seen, I don't want to use the word violence because a lot of it hasn't been as violent, but we've seen a lot more of those incidents in 10, 11, 12-year-olds situations going on that is just like, we've never seen it as a country. Not to put it on, but it's sort of stuff that you see. You take it back to the wars in Africa and like that, where kids are brought up in wars and they are given a gun at 10, and that's because that's what they feed off from, So our society in New Zealand now is rising up and going, oh, that 13-year-old kid there he's the coolest kid because he did this, and I want to do the same thing, and not realizing the correlation of what he actually did is actually wrong because I haven't been guided or informed and going, hey, we need to respect and we need to adhere to, societal rules because at home we never saw any rules or rule sets, and not necessarily might not be a home situation, it's just again
it's a society situation. Yeah. I'm not bagging parents. Absolutely, it's the hardest job in the world, and it's the one that we are undervalued most for.
Yeah.
So it's not about that at all. It's about something about society that doesn't value what humans need, which is really odd because if you think about New Zealand and Māori culture, for example, that collectivist kind of culture of whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, they are alive in Māori culture, and colonisation and kind of Western ideology has stripped away that. And what we need in terms of to be happy, healthy human beings already exist here in the indigenous culture of our land. And so it's almost like we've forgotten what we inherently know to be true for favour of being caught up in this kind of this kind of Ferris wheel of needing to consume, create, produce, when we really just need to go back to basics. And it does mean a big paradigm shift. And that's absolutely scary because we are all so hooked into the way that we live. We were raised in this way.
Yep.
And somebody says, hey, the way we're doing it is wrong. The first thing you're going to do is get cognitive dissonance and go, no, it's not.
Because this is the way it is, right?
Yeah, because it's the way it is. Or what are you talking about, love? You don't know what you're talking about because it's too difficult. They're going to defend against that or attack it because it's in the too hard basket, because it is. It's really fucking difficult to do that. So we need to be really kind of clear on self-awareness. We need to understand our own processes, our own biases, our own emotional needs, so we can create a future that is fit for human flourishing. And that starts with teaching our children the right way in the first instance. We've gone on this pathway of talking about building resilience in our kids. And we've gone about, we need to be resilient, we need to be resilient, we need to be resilient. And I think that's a completely lost cause because we're teaching them to be resilient to a world that's hostile rather than teaching them to be hopeful, to be changing the future for a way that's actually more in line with what human beings need. So that's why kids are losing hope, is because what's the point of keep picking yourself up and getting back out there when what is out there is just hostile and our nervous system knows is not good enough. So we need to stop and we need to reevaluate exactly what it is that we need to be doing on this planet, because otherwise we are just walking into disaster.
It's true. Like there's a few human beings throughout the world. You're talking about raising kids to a society that hope and flourish, and that's the way I see it. And then there's a few people that come through the cracks we've had in the last 10 or 15 years that come through it in almost in a purest state of they do that. And when they become the adult, they are so unique and different. They are actually changing the world. And it's like we're not realizing going, but hold on, look over there. That's what happens when someone comes through and does flourish, and we allow them to flourish. And when they come to the top of the hill almost, and their perception is so different, and their view to the world so different, and then they try to change it. And it's like, it's that sort of imagery a lot of people would have seen on social media. It's like the two Qs at the cubicles and going, cool, this is easy money, or this is hard work, but it'll be worth it in the long run. And there's one person standing here and everyone's standing on the easy money queue. And that's the sort of stuff we see now, that we do see the right sides of the right path, but there's just too few of them through society. And like I said, it needs to be the shift. So the challenge I throw to you, Emma, right now is, we've spoken about a whole lot of pieces, is what is the big challenge or mandate to anyone listening or watching that goes, okay, they go, okay, great, I want to try and help with the paradigm shift of us coming back. What is the challenge for them in society, in their situation at the moment, to try and help over this year into next year as a society, us moving more to help our kids flourish and feel safe and allow them to go out to a world that is a better place when they are our age?
Acknowledge and heal your own trauma. Mm-hmm. We've all got trauma, and we've not taken the time or been given the time to acknowledge that we're traumatized. We can't have been raised on this planet and not have experienced trauma. And instead of keep going, it's okay. Our body, I don't know if you've read that book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yep.
Our body collects it, and our brain disconnects from it. So we continue to tell ourselves the story that things are okay, but we need to stop and we need to check in with ourselves, and we need to acknowledge and heal our own trauma. And then we can connect with the part of our children that needs us to be emotionally aware so they can develop into happy, healthy human beings. So it doesn't start with our kids, it starts with us. We can't show up well for our kids until we can show up well for ourselves.
That's amazing. I love that. It is so true. The keeping the score. I need to. I'll definitely take a look at that book, and it's so true of a lot of underlying issues that you get brought up and go through. And I speak about it quite a bit at the moment. Again, with both my parents are here, and obviously I was raised in South Africa. It's an interesting time now. What I'm seeing, and I can actually see it from the outside in. So I've been here for almost close to 20 years now, but. In the last sort of couple of years, at the back of COVID, and in the last couple of years, like every couple of weeks, my dad would tell me that a friend that he grew up with, same age as him, and my dad's in his late 60s, still young to me and everything else, and he would say to me, do you remember this friend of his, or remember this guy I played sport with, he passed away, this happened. And I'm like, it's crazy. It seems like every couple of weeks, there's someone that he knows is passing away back in South Africa. And I sat down and spoke to a few friends, and what it looks like, it came to a lot of it is the underlying issue of being in a country that's over anxious and over the pressure of growing up in that country with the level of violence and the fear that is in there. And a lot of the stuff that we saw was triggered from the heart attacks and the body giving up. And then I did even further research into it, that the average age of a man in New Zealand to South Africa is 15 years difference. There's a 15-year difference of life expectancy between the two countries. And it was just from that whole societal pressure and push. You don't feel it now and building up and keeping the score, but at the end, your days, it's just knocking days and months off at it. And people laugh because my dad hasn't looked like his age since he left. And that was because of the release of all that stress and pressure. And then I go and look at my uncles and stuff like that I remember when I was back there. They were young and fit, and I go back and look and going, they've aged, but they've aged almost more than what my dad has aged. And my dad's got 20 years on them. And it just shows that impact of the society that we're not paying attention to a lot as well.
And that's retrospective data too, isn't it? The world shifted since then.
Yeah.
And, South Africa, is a very different country to New Zealand, absolutely. But what we're seeing is a shift towards that more kind of disconnected, disillusioned way of being here in New Zealand. And what you're talking about is the impact of cortisol on our bodies and our nervous systems, and how that increases our physical health impairments, including kind of COPD, heart attack, stroke, not just the mental health issues. There's a whole gamut of our bodies and our brains just can't cope with the way that we live today, and that we're seeing the cracks show in our kids. And so that's why we as the grown-ups need to take the lead and stop and think about how we change. The world we live in today is largely socially constructed. We've created it. We create why we do what we do. We've become conditioned to believe that it's normal, and we repeat these patterns over and over again because it gives us a sense of safety and security, because we believe that's the things that we need to do. It takes courage and bravery to stop and reimagine how we could be different when we're caught in that treadmill. And we're invested in that treadmill too. We've been told since we were tiny that you get a good education, you earn lots of money, you get a nice car, you go on holiday, you know, all of these things. And if you're not doing that, you're not good enough.
Yep.
You know, so we've been sold this kind of story about our own validation that we need to do all of these things to be a good functioning member of society, rather than questioning whether what we're told is the right thing for us. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to stop, and we need to ask ourselves whether what we're seeing is really increasing anxiety and mental health issues, or a perfectly understandable trauma response to the threat of the society we've created.
So true. It's so true. As we're coming up to the end of today's show, there's been so much information put out there and us to talk about it. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners or watchers with? Is there any sort of last points that you'd like to tell them about?
I think for me, it's about the difference between hope and resilience, because hope is the thing that has been there behind overcoming all human adversity throughout the whole timeline of history. And so, like I said earlier, resilience is more to me a character trait of how we pick ourselves up and we continue going. It's more of the practical aspect of kind of moving forward. Whereas hope is more of the emotional element to that. It's the reason why resilience keeps working, because otherwise, why would you get up if you didn't have hope? And hope is diminishing, because actually what the future looks like to our kids is actually quite bleak. We've got climate change, we've got weather events, we've got all of this different stuff. So what we need to be doing is cultivating hope in our kids. Now, hope is an emotional state, but it's a kind of a slow burn emotional state, and it's linked to something called our eudaimonic well-being. So the world that we live in today, it kind of more reinforces hedonistic well-being, you know, that kind of quick, fast joy, you know, pick up your phone, you get a dopamine hit, all of that stuff's going on. It's like, who's got the flashiest car, who's going on the best holiday, but it's fast-paced, short-lived. And we've lost eudaimonic well-being, which is that slow burn, which is contribution to things, being involved at a community level, slowing down and thinking about enjoying the beauty in nature. All of those real kind of under the surface, slow burn things. We need to focus more on our kids' eudaimonic well-being. We need to be helping them really connect with themselves and understand who they are, rather than who society is telling us they should be. And that's what parents need to be doing, is focusing on creating a space for our kids to be true to themselves. And I then believe, with the right guidance, they will, sounds a bit cliche, they will be able to change the way that we live. And that's my hope.
That's amazing, and thanks so much for that, Emma. It's so true from that quick response to the long term. So, just from example, my daughter went on a 3-week school trip last year down the Wanganui River. 3 weeks, no cell phones, no parent. We never heard from her for 3 weeks. Living in the bush, kayaking, everything, totally outside of her comfort zone. But she came back a different human being. She's still today different from that, and triggered amazing directions and paths for her.
In her brain too.
She came back and all of a sudden her diet had changed. She's like, cool, I'll eat all these veggies because that's all we had, and they're actually not that bad. And I want to do this and I want to do this. And it was like all of a sudden, because it wasn't a one-day thing. There were 3 weeks consumed and down this path, all of a sudden, like things were just firing off. And I'm so happy that she got to experience it and do that, because it opened some more of those true nature, down to earth door paths or paths that some of our teenage or tweens and preteens and all that don't experience at the moment.
And what our body is evolutionary primed for.
Yeah.
We're not evolutionary primed to live in the way that we live. You know, most people can't even do a deep squat anymore, and that's supposed to be our comfort position. Do you know what I mean? Because our bodies are so used to sitting in chairs. You know, so our bodies and our brains are not designed to live in the way that we live. They're designed to live more in the experience that your daughter had, in participation and contribution to nature. And so we need to get back more to that. And I think it would be lovely to think that that isn't just a one-off 3-week experience that your daughter reflects on, that you can create opportunities, and me too, opportunities for my children and our children to continue having experiences like that, because that is what their body, their brain and their nervous system needs.
Yeah, totally. So the last thing, just want to find out from yourself, if anyone's interested, Emma, is where can they reach out to you, find out more about yourself? Where's the best place for them to find you?
So I am the Director of Psychological Services at the Child Psychology Service. So the Child Psychology Service, we have now 40 psychologists across New Zealand. Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington are our main hubs, but we have some in the regions too. If you want to find us, we work mainly with children and young people and schools and their families with anxiety, depression, school avoidance due to emotionally based reasons, some behaviour, learning. You can find us on www.thechildpsychologyservice.co.nz, or you can email our practice manager at info@thechildpsychologyservice.co.nz, and we'd love to hear from you if we can help.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks so much for that, Emma. And as always, all the details and information about Emma will be in the description, depending where you listen or watching this. There's so much more. We could sit here and talk for hours about that, but I wanted to make sure that we got across everything, the importance of what Emma has to say. Like I said, you can also go over and see her at TEDx speeches she did at the end of last year, and look through it. Have a listen today again. Go back. Come through this twice, go through this Emma's speech and listen, because there's so much more there. Even as myself, as a parent, listen to and going, yes, I can see that's where I've made my mistake, or yes, I need to be doing that better. And then sitting down and understanding what the path is as a generation of how as a parent we're going to evolve, how as a parent or as an adult we're going to evolve, and how as a parent down to my kids we're going to evolve to allow them to flourish and go from that. And I hope that from today's episode that you can pick up from that and take them from that and see that we can make a difference. It's not going, we've got to the end and we're down the road that we can't go back from. The path is still there. We can evolve, we can change, and we can make a difference for ourselves and our kids and our future and everything else. But I hope you can take from that. And as always, thanks for coming over to the show. Stay beautiful, stay powerful, and hope to see you again.